Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Demsey, the co-producer of the Jazz Room series, and we are here today with the great bassist, the world-class bassist, Steve LaSpina, whose quartet is going to be featured on a Jazz Room upcoming. And I also need to add that Steve has been stalwart here. He has been on the faculty for a number of years here at William Paterson, and he is one of the go-to people. He's one of the most in-demand faculty members for the students, and really is part of what you might call the brand of the program. But that's not why he's on the series. He's on the series because of this great quartet and because of his long recording history. So welcome, Steve. It's really great to talk to you under these circumstances. Really great.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I would like to start for our students, but also for the audience, by kind of putting you in their shoes in a way. Like you started playing bass, obviously, in high school, and your dad was a huge influence, right, in Chicago.
Right. Yes. I actually started playing bass in grammar school, but I couldn't reach it. And I was too small. And my dad used to put phone books down, and I had to wait till I was in 7th grade to actually play the upright bass. So I was playing electric bass till then, and guitar and piano.
And he was a bassist, yes?
Yes, my dad played bass. He was he wanted to be full-time, and I think he was till he's had a family. And in the early 60s, my father was working almost a lot, and he actually had a steady group in one of the clubs on the south side of Chicago in Calumet City with alto sax, bass, and drums. And in the back room of this club was where Sonny Rollins and people like that would play.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember him having people over to the house, them jamming in the basement when I was really little. And so I kind of, it was all around me. And my dad also studied some classical music. He and Richard Davis actually studied with the same bass teacher when he was young. That was one of his stories. He would always talk about Richard Davis.
So it's kind of in your genetic structure.
Yes. I mean, it goes back further. My grandfather, everybody on my father's side were musicians, and they had a band during the Depression that actually played a couple of nights a week in a bar and restaurant over Orchestra Hall.
Wow.
And one of my uncles, I had two uncles that were actually very good musicians, very schooled, and one of them wrote me a theory book when I was in 8th grade, handwritten theory book.
You still have it?
No, unfortunately I don't. And I even had my grandfather's book. He played trumpet, that was handwritten for him in Sicily. And the whole first half of the book is solfege. And he had to do solfege and everything before he got his horn.
You want to explain that for non-musical?
Well, you learn how to, doe a deer, a female deer, from the Sound of Music, I guess, would be the easiest way. And when I was studying classical music, which I was doing very seriously when I was in late in high school and early in college, my bass teacher said to me, I was living with my grandfather when I was in college, and he says, take the music to your grandfather and see if he can solfege it. He gave me a Bach piece. And so I brought it over to my grandfather. He put the music down on, I'll never forget, he leaned it up against a bottle or something on the kitchen table, conducted and sang the whole thing with solfege. Yeah, and it was remarkable.
Well, all right.
So that really proved to me, I got to get on this.
Amazing. So, and when you got on it, when did you start working? Young.
When I started working,
as a bassist.
Yeah, I was 15, 16. Because my dad was working a lot of club dates, and he would double book himself on purpose, and then he'd send me, and that was fabulous, because that was quite an education. And the guys he worked with, they all dug that I was this young kid, especially back in the early 70s, that wanted to play upright bass and play those kind of jobs. So I was pretty lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you were playing around Chicago, and when did you start to play on the jazz scene? When did you start to get to know those folks?
Well, I Rufus Reed was actually going to Northwestern at the time,
Oh,
and he'd graduated, and I started taking he was getting, he was getting very busy in those days, and I'd taken some lessons with him, and he made a few phone calls, and he said, "Listen, when you can't get me, call this guy." And one
wow.
of those people did. It was Buddy Montgomery and Eddie Harris. It was like one of the first gigs I had, and Rufus was
Not a
there
bad
with
first
me.
gig.
Yeah, I mean, first gig of that kind of caliber.
Buddy Montgomery, to explain, Wes Montgomery's brother, great
Pianist,
pianist.
yes,
Yeah,
incredible pianist.
yeah.
And Eddie Harris, of course, great tenor saxophone,
Hmm.
Chicago person as well. And Rufus was there for the rehearsal, and I remember they were playing. He wanted to play Wave, and I had no idea what what Wave was. And so Rufus was standing there telling me the chord changes. So that was kind of my beginning, and Rufus was extremely helpful. He was one of my first teachers outside of my father for jazz.
But he's not all that much older than you. 10 years,
Um,
maybe.
well, I don't know how.
See that? I don't know how old. I
He
don't want to
probably
date
is.
Rufus here. I'm not sure. I
Well,
should
he
know.
was, he'd finished college and he was getting ready. He was started touring with people right away when he
Mhm.
started working in Chicago, and then I remember when he moved to New York, um, I was able to pick up some of the slack when he moved, and that kind of put me into the upper echelon of musicians in Chicago.
Who were you playing with at that time in Chicago?
In Chicago, there was a tenor saxophonist named Joe Daly
Hmm.
and Richie Corpolongo, an alto saxophone player. These were all like the guys on the scene. Von Friedman, I got to play with a couple times on the South Side. Um, yeah, I mean, I did this. I got this one job with a piano player who was teaching composition at University of Chicago. And his name was William Thomas McKinley, and Rufus would do a lot of work with him.
Hmm. I know
And
that name.
he was incredible musician, incredible piano player. And we got this job at a club called the Back Room, which was like a piano bar on Rush Street. And the job started at 10 and went till 4 in the morning. And mind you, I was like 17 or 18 doing this job. And that was kind of like my breakout. That's when, because all the musicians in Chicago heard about this trio. And Tom was playing a lot like Keith and Herbie. He had all that stuff down. And that's how I met everybody. And that was actually subbing for Rufus, because Rufus called him and said, "When I can't make it, call this guy."
Makes
So
it tough to make your early morning classes in high school.
well, no, I mean, I graduated early from high school.
Ah, okay.
I was
So you
going,
were
I
out of
was
school.
going, yeah, I actually graduated like a year early just to go to U of I to go to their jazz program.
Mhm.
And then I only spent a semester there and moved back to Chicago. So
Mhm.
yeah, I was going to DePaul University in those days, and I had the 9 o'clock theory class that freshmen had. And a lot of times I would go home to, I had a little apartment, sleep for 2 hours, then get back in the car. And DePaul University was downtown Chicago in those days
Yeah.
in an office building, and go to take my classes. And yeah, it wasn't easy, but I was living the jazz life.
Yeah. Well, and living the academic life even
Yep.
then. You
Yes.
know?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, and that's things. I was very lucky in those days. I mean, that was when a lot of guys were playing electric bass, and there weren't a lot of young people playing upright. And
Mhm.
actually, a few years after that, just before Rufus left, Todd Kuhlman was living in Chicago too. So we were all like, that was kind of like the community, a few
Okay.
other guys. So we all kind of came up together in Chicago that way.
Hmm. Todd's from Gary, right?
I don't
I think
remember
he
the
is. I think he grew up in Gary.
Yeah, and he had gone to Indiana, and then he came up to
Uh-huh. Shout
to
out to Dr. Kuhlman, by the way. I'll
yes,
make sure and tell him his name is coming up prominently.
yes. Well, he was part of the gang, man. That was our group, and like I said, I was working all the time back then. There was so much work, and I was doing jingles too during the day. I was doing a fair amount of jingle work on electric bass. And one of the reasons I moved to New York was I didn't want to play that much electric bass anymore.
Yeah.
And of course, I'd always wanted to come to New York. And shortly
By the way,
after,
but before I'm just defining terms here. Jingles, studio dates,
yes,
studio recording, commercials,
commercials.
etc.
Chicago was very active in those days with doing commercials, and there was a little bit of film work, but mostly commercials. Yeah, McDonald's and Ford and all of that those days. 60 seconds.
Were you out on the road at all before you came to New York?
I was. I actually took my first road job. Wasn't a jazz job. It was kind of Hollywood. I worked with Vic Damone. That was the first time I went on the road. Was with Vic Damone, and Colin Bailey was playing drums, and I think it was Joe Parnello playing piano, and I forget the guitar player's name. And that was my first road gig. I was, 19, maybe 20.
Yeah.
I remember my first airplane flight was a flight to Cleveland, to go do a gig with those people.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Wow. And then you came to New York in what year was that? Like mid 70s, later 70s?
In late 70s, in 79. And I had been working with Marian McPartland in Chicago and doing her Midwest work.
Okay.
And I made up my mind April 1st, I was moving to New York, even if I was living in my car. And that New Year's Eve, I went on I was actually married very young then. And my wife and I were going to go on our last big vacation because I was making a lot of money in Chicago and I didn't know what was going to happen in New York. And just as I'm leaving, I hear the phone machine go off and I hear it's Marian. So I run back in and she tells me that her bassist has left the trio and asking me if I want to take the job. And she heard I was moving to New York.
Wow.
So that's how all that happened. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how much, like being in Marian McPartland's trio, what did that mean at that time? How much were you working?
She was working in those days. She was working enough that when I moved to New York, I was able to pay my bills. Wow. That's how much we were working in those days.
Yeah.
And, she helped me, co-sign for my apartment on 23rd Street. And she helped me get my piano moves from Chicago. And we had the summers at the Carlisle 5 nights a week. And that was the education that I was just so lucky to have. Play 5 nights a week with Marian and learning tunes every night. And she would just throw tunes at you. And,
Was there one drummer in that trio the whole time? Or was it? Well, he's going to be paid for Jazz Room as well.
Yeah, she's gonna end up on top of the shelves. That's what she likes. Okay. So the drummer in those days, when I first moved to New York, was Mike DePasqua. I don't know if you're familiar with
that name. I never have met him.
Mike was a great sort of Dijonette kind of drummer, and we had this trio, and we worked a lot of gigs together. We traveled with her, mostly in the United States, and I recorded one record with Mike, and the other record, the other album I did with Marian was Jake Hanna, who my dad was in the Air Force with and played in the Air Force band together.
Oh, that's beautiful. Full circle.
Full circle, yes.
Well, that's actually when I met you. We've had a laugh about that story. You were with Marian at Carnegie Recital Hall on a Alec Wilder concert, and Marian had given you this classical piece because Alec Wilder, for the audience, he wrote for everything. He wrote a lot of famous popular songs, I'll Be Around, It's So Peaceful in the Country, but he also knew a lot of concert musicians and he wrote all kinds of sonatas. And so Marian was doing this with you, and this was Carnegie Recital Hall, and I think your bridge went out, right?
No, what happened was the end pin was resting on the cable, and the first note you play this pickup, and then you have this big bow thing that you have to do because of the note sustains for a long time, and it's a very slow tempo. So when I went to change the bow like that, the bass slipped out of my hands because it was on the cable, and we had to start over. I mean, and she asked me to do that piece, and I was looking for an apartment at that time. We were working at Michael's Pub, and I was practicing that. And the amazing thing about all of this is that one of the records that influenced me most for my classical career was Gary Carr playing the music of Alec Wilder.
Yeah.
So I was familiar with that piece, and it was one of my, and it still is to this day, one of my favorite pieces of music. And I was young and naive. I was ready for anything. I don't know. I look at it now and I'm like, oh my God, I actually played that in Carnegie Recital Hall. What was I drinking? You know?
Oh, it was fantastic. And I mean, yeah, Alec, to further explain, took no prisoners. You know, he was writing for the best people in the world. Wrote tenor saxophone concertos for Zoot Sims and Stan Getz. Wrote a couple pieces for Joe Wilder, no relation. And yeah, so I mean, he was writing for the best, the New York Woodwind Quintet, all these famous people. So yeah, so his piece, I've never looked at the part for that bass piece, but I can only imagine having played the sax pieces.
I still have the music from that performance on my piano because I was transcribing the piano part because I can't find the piano part for it.
Oh, really? Oh, let me work on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole.
You know, as fate would have it, you know, I'm like the co-executor of the estate.
Wow.
So if I can't find it, we're in deep trouble.
I have the guitar suite and I have one of the other piano bass suites, but that one, I'm not sure if he wrote it for tuba originally or if he wrote it for bass.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a crazy experience. I mean, I was so naive, Carnegie Recital Hall. When I think back about it now, I'm like, my God, what was wrong with you? You know?
It was what was right with us, hearing that great music. Marian was a longtime friend of Alec and played on a lot of those concerts, sometimes just solo, but yeah, it was very special to have you there.
He used to join us on the road. And
Alec.
I spent a week hanging out with him at a pool in South Beach when we were down there doing something. I don't remember what the job was, but I remember sitting and talking with Alec every day. It was the highlight of my day to listen to all the different stories that he had to say.
Yeah.
It was just, you know, very lucky to
Miraculous man. You know, they don't make people like that anymore.
For
True
sure.
man of the world and you know, a maverick in a way. You know, when did you start playing with Stan Getz? That was later.
Let me think now. I worked with Marian for about 5 or 6 years, and then so I started with Stan. My first daughter was born in 80, so it was like 84.
Okay.
84, 85. And I was good friends with George Mraz, and Jim McNeely and I went to the University of Illinois together.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some kind of thing where Stan needed somebody for a tour, and I was able to do it.
And that first concert is on YouTube, right?
Yes, it's off and on YouTube, BBC.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it shows up and then it doesn't show up. I have a copy of it actually because that was my very first night with Stan, and he, you know, he puts you through changes when you start. If you're the new guy in the band, you better be ready to be at the bottom of the barrel. And I prepared for that job. And luckily, you know, Jim was my neighbor. He lived down the street from me, and he gave me a book of music. And the great story about that is that the first tune we did was Sippin' at Bells, which he had recorded with Mark Johnson earlier on a Concord record that was just bass and tenor. So I woodshedded that tune so that I tried to learn as much of his music as I could. And on that tape, you'll see a music stand, and there's a piece of music sitting like this on the music stand. That's Sippin' at Bells. The first tune we did, he called Sippin' at Bells. Took the music, Did it, nailed it. Stan and I got along just fine after that.
You know, the moment I remember from that video is Desafinado, I believe.
Mhm. Yeah.
And he plays the melody, which is, you know, it's a long, involved form, and he just nods to you and walks away.
Yeah. And then he plays the last phrase that I play. He starts his solo with that and goes on and elaborates on it for about 30 or 40 seconds. And I'm like, oh my God, man. He had such ears, you
Yeah.
know. That was an incredible, incredible experience. And
One of
that
our
was my
the
first
great
time.
tenor players in history, right there. You know,
Yeah, it was a really great experience.
did you do a lot of international touring with Stan, or?
We did a couple, and I did the Lush Life with him, the club on Bleecker Street. I worked with him for about 6 or 8 months, and then for reasons beyond my control, I had to leave because you know, when he would drink, he would be another person,
Mhm.
and I couldn't stay.
Another, you know, a great Zoot Sims quote there.
Yeah,
A nice bunch of guys. I think he
very
identified
true.
Stan as a nice bunch of guys.
Very true. And you know, Jim McNeely and I left, I think, at the very same gig. And he called me some years later, or maybe a year later. He had a last minute job at the Cleveland Jazz Festival. And would you please come and do it? And I'm like, sure, I'll do it. And we get on the bandstand and he starts playing Seven Steps to Heaven. I didn't know Seven Steps to Heaven. And we're playing and I'm trying to find the chord changes. And he turns around, he says to me, I got you. I'm like, yeah, you got me.
God himself, too.
Well, I got
Wow.
man, what an education and priceless education and
Yeah.
such music he made. Oh my Lord, something.
And you played with Jim Hall for a long time, one of the great guitarists in history.
Yes, I was very fortunate to hook up with Jim. Um, I auditioned for him, and I had smoke coming out my ears when when I finished that audition. There were so many possibilities in bass notes, and I actually didn't get the job right off the bat. And then he needed me to sub for somebody, and then he hired me.
Hmm.
And because I didn't have anything to lose, I was so worried. The audition with him was just, I mean, I never played with anybody, and I hadn't played with that many guitar players. Well, no, I
Hmm.
shouldn't say that, but guitar players like him.
Yeah.
And there were so many possibilities musically. And when we did eventually hook up, it was really, really special.
Was it mostly a trio at that stage?
Um, yes, in the beginning. Matter of fact, a bunch of bootleg recordings have appeared from the in 1986 to I think maybe 88 was just trio.
Hmm.
And then there's the 88 record with Tom Harold and Joey Barron. And Joey Barron started playing in the
Hmm.
trio for a couple of years. And then Terry Clark came back.
Wow.
And there's actually a bootleg that I also just got a hold of that somebody gave me of Michelle Petrucciani and the trio. That's
Wow. With you guys.
with Terry and
Wow.
myself. So
Fantastic.
so
Is that
funny
in
how
Europe?
things are bubbling up. No, it was at the Regatta Bar
Ah,
in Boston.
in Boston.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I remember at Manny Album's funeral, Jim Hall and Bob Brookmeyer played All the Things You Are.
mhm.
And Jim started, and I'm sure he played that tune with him 1,000 times. And Bob would start to come in, and Jim would go, and then he'd play some more. You know, he turned everything into a dominant chord, so the whole thing was this like spinning. And Bob would shook him off about 3 times, and they finally played. The whole thing was fantastic, and huge applause. Bob takes the mic and says, "I was lost the entire time." You know, Jim's there.
Yeah, Jim, that was kind of a thing that I felt like I was kind of made to do. I mean, we would play together, and I could from the very beginning, I kind of knew what was going on. I kind of knew what I needed to do, and he, he gave you a lot of freedom harmonically to do different things with him, but you also had to be aware of when you could slide away from the route and when you couldn't, and man, I learned so much from him, just so much about improvising and the economy of notes that he would play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I toured, did a lot of, most of my touring was done with Jim. And I remember the first time we went to Italy together, and Japan. It was just how lucky I was to have those moments. And the first Concord tour was opposite Rosemary Clooney and Ray Brown's group, and
Wow.
Emily Remler was on that one as well, and Scott Hamilton's group, and it was just like wow.
So it was an all Concord Records thing?
Yeah, it was Concord record tour promotion kind of thing that we
Yeah.
did. And Carl Jefferson was there, and it was quite the production.
Well, Jim was a master musician, and that trio was really extraordinary. And your playing in it always was, to explain again for our audience, the bassist's traditional role is playing the bottom note of the chord. You're the foundation, but with Jim, as you said, it was a much more fluid situation.
And the way he would voice chords, oh my Lord. I'm like, that's why the steam was coming out of my ears the first time I played with him. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like 5 possibilities of different notes that I was hearing in my head,
Yeah.
And his compositions too were very, very impactful on me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about you as a composer, because one of the things that I know will strike our audience on this Jazz Room concert is not just your playing and the great group, but your pieces. Just, marvelous, evocative stuff that, how long have you always been composing? Did you start back in Chicago, or did that start later?
Well, the first tune I wrote was actually in Chicago early on, and I thought it was. I woke up and heard the song in my head, and I sat down and wrote it out, and I didn't think too much of it. And then when I started with Marian, she's like, "Well, what do you have?" And I would bring her a couple tunes, and we started playing. We actually recorded one of them on the Concord. I think it was the Concord record. So, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to writing that much in the 80s. And like I said, I was traveling with Jim in those days. And the writing started, I was doing some recording for a label, and tell the story. Walter Becker was a producer from Steely Dan.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up to me and he says, "You should be writing music." He says, "Why don't you write something for me? I'm going to be producing some records for this new age label called Windham Hill, and see what you got and send me some tapes." So I sat down and I think I wrote 3 tunes, and I was able to raise enough money to go in and record them. And he was talking about going to a studio in Maui, and I was having all these dreams about going to Maui and recording. And he wrote me back. I sent it to him. He wrote me back. He says, "They're great tunes, but it's really not new age music, but keep writing." He says, "You got something there."
Oh.
So I actually was teaching at NYU then in the 80s. And I took I left NYU to go study composition, and I studied classical composition for about 6 or 8 months.
Who did you study with?
His name was Robert Aldridge. He actually,
Sure.
he was very connected with everything, and he would help me with writing, jazz tunes as well. I wrote some string quartets, a bunch of different things for him.
He's at Rutgers now, I believe. Or maybe he retired.
He was at Montclair State, I think.
But then I think he went to Rutgers after
I
that.
don't know. I haven't spoken to him
Yeah.
in years, unfortunately. But he was a big influence,
Wow.
a
Okay.
big influence. And the first recording I did, um, for Ram Records, he wrote the liner notes for me. So that's how I got started. And then and it just seemed that like music, just I would come up with ideas and I would write things down. And when I was on the road with Jim in those days, we used to haul around scores, and one tour was all Bartók, and we would sit and listen to Bartók string quartets, and we would analyze and talk about it. And so like I had this kind of cross section of influences. I always say I'm a closet classical bassist, because that was my alter ego, was playing classical music as well. So all of that's kind of, plus I was learning, I never really had a jazz education per se, but writing music was helping me to fill in all the gaps. And tunes just started. I have 15 tunes sitting in a book right now. I'm constantly writing, and it's therapy for me. So the record and the tunes that we did on the concert were half the tunes were new. The other half of the tunes were from this Ram record that I did many years ago. I had won a grant.
This is the Jazz Room, this concert.
Yes.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they were older.
Yes. I decided, I told Niels that I really wanted to re-record some of my favorite tunes that I've written. I've recorded probably 80 or more tunes on Steeplechase.
Wow.
And I wanted to re-record the ones that I really like. And I was able to get this fabulous band together to do this. And he was fine. I said, but I'll write 4 or 5 new tunes. So the Road Ahead and Clouds, I forget, and the No Way, those are from the Ram record.
Oh,
That
okay.
really got any publicity in this country. It was an Italian record label that I did that one for. And the other tunes were from other Steeplechase records. And then there were the 4 new ones.
Yeah, to put this in context, this Jazz Room concert was a CD release event.
Yeah.
This was, did you make the record? You said, I think, before the shutdown.
Yes.
Before the COVID shutdown. But this was the first time the band had played together.
Right. We recorded the record December 2019. The record wasn't released till October 2020. And we had not had a chance to play together since the recording. Louise and I and Eric had done some trio hits in 2019 as well. So, and Joel and I go back a while, the gigs that we've done together, as well as doing some work at Smalls with a different rhythm section.
Do you want to talk about, you mentioned their first names, you want to talk about the band, the guys in the band?
Yes. So Joel Frahm is a incredible tenor saxophonist, a special connection to music, all the music that I've ever heard him play. He really brings out beautiful characteristics of the music. And I think I met Joel. Oh, I was getting together with some people. I wanted to ask some guys to come over to read some new music that I had written. And he accepted, and he made the trip out from Brooklyn to my house in New Jersey and played through the tunes. And he's like, oh, I really love your music. I want to do more. So when I could get him, and that was probably 2016, when I could get him to do a gig, he would do it.
Yeah, that's one of the really, Joel has one of the great sounds on the scene today. Just really, I mean, you noticed when you were doing the sound check, and by the way, this concert, for people watching this, has not happened yet, but we videotaped it since the Jazz Room is all via video right now. We're talking about the future. It's like Johnny Carson, as far as everybody watching this knows, it's tomorrow, but it was last week. Yeah. So this is Yeah, during your sound check, I was parked there 3 feet from him, just like letting my DNA, soak it up. I mean, that's really, there are very, very few sounds on the scene like that today for people who are, under 80.
Hmm. Yeah, and his choice of
Oh,
notes and his
hmm,
spirit, it all comes out in what he plays.
yeah.
And those are very important qualities for me that I, when I'm looking to put a band together, I'm looking for people that have a voice, a kind of a uniqueness to their voice.
Mhm.
And so Joel was one of my first picks for this particular recording session. And Eric, I mean, Louise and I met years ago, and I had the brunch gig at Cafe Loop for like 17 years. In the last 4 years, Luis was doing it. So we got
That's
to know
Luis
each other.
Perdomo, by the way.
Luis Perdomo, yes, incredible pianist and such a nice guy. And again, his musical spirit is amazing. And he said, I want to hook you up. We're going to do some trio hits with Eric. Well, man, the first time we did a trio hit at Mesereau with Eric McPherson, I was like, oh my God, I've only had that feeling a couple times. Like when I would play with Jim, I felt like my musical ideas were like sliding on ice. There was no resistance. Well, that's the way I felt with this trio with Eric McPherson and Luis Perdomo, man. It was just like too many ideas were rushing out of my head because there's like no resistance. Harmonic rhythm, it was all just, okay, Steve, what are you hearing? It can happen here. And I think we did 4 nights at Mesereau in the course of a month. And it was just like, man, this is the rhythm section I want for my next record. And I honestly hadn't recorded a CD from 10 years. My last CD for Steeplechase was 10 years prior, I think.
But you have a very long history on that label, Steeplechase Records.
Yes, goes back to the 90s.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know why I paused, but I did pause. A lot of things were going on in my life.
Hmm.
And but when I put this all together, I'm like, yeah, this is the group I want. And luckily, those guys are all very busy musicians. They're
Hmm.
working all the time with lots of people. And everything came together. We were able to rehearse. Everybody made it to the recording date. And I'm telling you, the recording date was like less than 4 hours.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, it was just like bang.
Not many outtakes from that.
No, I don't think we did any more than 2 takes, and a lot of tunes were just 1 take.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
it sounded like it on the concert. I mean, anybody watching this video needs to check this concert out because it's really, uh, any jazz event. There's some magic because it's just one time and it's fleeting. But this is really, there's some magic there that with this group, as great as everybody is, there's something greater than the sum with this quartet. It's really, and your tunes is like they're that's the fifth group member, you know.
yeah, I mean, the music, you can write music, but it's the people that you have playing with you and their abilities to add the music. They help make the music from the written note, and
Mhm.
these gentlemen really, it just. And like I said, we hadn't played since December 2019, and I was a little nervous because I haven't been. Nobody's really been playing. We've all been doing little things here and there, but boy, hit that first tune and it was, yeah, okay, you know.
Yeah.
And there was one tune, Without You, that that I've not recorded. That's the only tune. I added that tune because it's a very special tune. And that was the first time we played that tune. It was a ballad. And it just was like, oh my God. And there's a lot of space and a lot of emotion and it was just, oh, my heart was full.
You mean that day you'd never played it before?
We had never played it together.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
yeah.
Because there was as you're rehearsing, there's all sorts of business stuff happening, and we're trying to get everything set up. It all just stopped when you played that tune.
Yeah,
during the rehearsal.
I'd forgotten that I wrote that tune. I mean, I wrote that tune very early in my writing career, and it was recorded on a. Before I got the Steeplechase record thing, I did. Fred Hirsch and Jeff Hirschfield and myself had a group called ETC, and we were supposed to do 6 or 7 dates for that company. And it
Mhm.
was ETC, we did a trio date, and then it was ETC plus one. And our first guest was Jerry Bergonzi. And then we were supposed to do one with Bobby Watson and Tom Harold, and we would pick different people to join us.
Mhm.
And the record company went, we didn't get along. And in those days, it was easy, hi, goodbye. It was that kind
Yeah,
of thing. So, but I'd written that tune for that record date.
yeah,
That's in
I
the
get it.
90s.
Well, I hope I get a chance to play it someday. I mean, it's
Oh, that would
really
be wonderful.
heartbreakingly beautiful tune. Really.
And that was my study on minor chords with a major seven, because I
Mhm.
used a lot of that on that tune, you know.
Yeah, but it doesn't, there's nothing at all academic or study like about it. You know, it just feels like it just, as you say, it just flows out. It's just a beautiful piece,
Thank you. Yeah,
you know.
yeah, I was blown away, and I'm anxious to see the video because I don't remember anything now that I think about it.
Well, that's the best kind of performance when you're not there. You're there, but it's like you're not there. It's just happening.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful thing. I'm, Pete McGinnis and I were a grand audience of two for that, and you have to be careful not not to, because then it just comes out like, you know,
I tell you, the thing I was most worried about was playing for no audience, because I've never done that.
huh.
You know,
Oh, really? Because
no,
we introduced you, and we just walked backstage for a minute, and after the first tune, you were speaking to the people. It was like you were on a TV show.
well,
You were very natural with it. You
it's
know?
it was. I was a little concerned before we
Well,
started, but I,
it was
you know,
beautiful.
um, again, with all the marvelous people that I've worked with, not only Jim and Stan,
Mm.
Benny Carter, I worked quite a few years with, and he was great. And I've been around people and watched them how that's an important part of it too, is communicating with the audience. Even
Yeah.
though there's no audience, but
Well, but there is.
yeah,
What
there,
what ends up happening a lot of times on the jazz room concerts is there's a small coterie that day to see it live, but then you check it a week later, and it's the audience is much bigger than what we would draw live.
mm,
And a lot of times it's because these concerts are at 4 p.m. Eastern time, and we get a big audience in Europe and a big audience in Japan.
wow, well, that's
So,
great.
4 a.m.'s, there's a dedicated jazz audience in Japan, but not that dedicated, you know. So, yeah, we get this event. I'm doing a little plug here, but this and all the jazz room concerts go on demand a couple of days after the live thing. By Tuesday or so of the next Tuesday, they're on demand, and we leave them up for 30 days.
Oh, great, great.
And once you get an on demand ticket, or if you saw it live, you can watch it as many times as you want.
Mm,
So it's great.
fabulous.
So, Steve, you have, as I said at the beginning, you are truly one of our most respected and in demand teachers in our jazz
Mm.
program. Students that come here from all over the country. How does your teaching, how do your teaching and your music feed off of each other?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I started teaching. You're gonna laugh. The first teaching thing I did was with Tom McKinley, and it was, I think I had just started my freshman year at DePaul, or I just finished. Yeah, I did half a semester at U of I, then I went to DePaul, and I started working with Tom, and we actually taught a master's class with Tom at the University of Wisconsin.
Hmm.
You know, in my in my development, I was very, very lucky to study with some great teachers.
Mm.
I studied with Warren Benfield, classical music, and before him, I studied with one of Gary Carr's proteges.
Mm.
Stephanie Smith was her name. And I started teaching before I moved to New York. I had a crew of students.
Mm.
Teaching is to me is a natural thing, just like performing the bass, and it's the same thing, you know. Um, I've always been drawn to it. I've always and I think part of that is there's the incredible teachers, you know, like Rufus Reed and Warren Benfield and the other people that I've crossed paths with. I've always believed in giving back, and it's inspiring, and I find it a big part of my creativity, playing wise too. I mean, it's all part of the mix,
Mhm.
and um, it's something I really love. I really love to, you know,
Sure.
as much as I love to get up on the stage in my touring with all the people I've toured with, I feel the same way about teaching.
Mm.
It's inspiring.
Yeah.
It's constantly. Um, I get inspired by my students. You know, this semester I had three really great bass students, and man, the ideas I get from them, hopefully they're getting the same amount back from me. And
Yeah.
all the different students I come in contact with, I don't know, it's just it's a natural process.
And to hear them, we're having this conversation right after we just did 3 days of end of semester juries, and
Right.
jury is a horrible word because it sounds like you're is the student
A
guilty or
trial.
innocent. It's not
Right.
like that. It's that the students come in and they play with the faculty. So somebody said, "Oh, that must be a tough day," and I said, "What do you mean tough? Today I just heard Steve LaSpina and Bill Charlap for 8 hours. Who gets to do that? That's not tough. You know, so
It's
it's really rewarding to hear them come out and hear your students come out and do such a great job, and then other students get to play with you. Yeah, it's really, I don't take this for granted for a second.
well, it's um, being part of the faculty there as long as I have been has been an honor. And like I say, man, this part of the reason that I think myself and a lot of the other faculty are there as long as we are is because we have such a great program and great students to work with, you know.
Well, thank
And
you. I agree with that.
it's for me it's as it's as rewarding can be to have watched so many young people come through the program and go on and create great careers for themselves,
Mm.
and you know that I'm sharing the information that I have with them like someone shared with me, and
Mhm.
um I don't know, the process is the process, and it's a natural process for me,
Mhm.
and it's beautiful. I love it.
And you teach one particular course that I think everybody should take. It's called Performance Practice, which is, I don't know what that title means, but it's with the grad students. And it's kind of the, how would you describe it? Maybe the career building tools for a musician.
We cover a lot of bases in that class. Um, I talk about my own personal theories about improvisation and how our minds work. We get into the psychology of improvisation.
Hmm.
I talk about how you pack for a 3-week tour. You know, that's these are things
Yeah.
I have them each get up, and it's their band, and they have to introduce the tunes, talk to the audience. It's all that kind of stuff. And we also talk about a little bit of about life, what's happening as they're leaving now, they're embarking on their careers. Do you want to have a family? Do you want do you not do you want to go abroad? What exactly, and what exactly do you want to do? And then are you ready to be able to do a job that may come up for you that you may not have thought about, keeping your exploring the options, especially in today's world with the music business the way it is. You
Hmm.
have to be a little flexible and looking for possibilities too,
Yeah.
so I enjoy that class so much, and I think the students enjoy it. And then
Yeah.
our final project is I want them to write music, and I'm after everybody to write music, as well as my undergrad students, because I think that's such an important part of being a jazz musician, because we're
Hmm.
composing on the spot all the time anyways.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a really, I've really enjoyed it. And we've had some incredible students take that class.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, they all just say what a great experience it is,
well, that's nice
how
to hear.
much they're getting out of it. And I need to take it. I got to sign up for it someday.
I don't
Really.
know.
I mean, you've got every time I've come in and sat in on a class, I always go out going, every student in the building needs to do this.
Well, um, it's just sharing life experience, and
Hmm.
I remember um, one of the students, female student, was said to me. She says, "Can I be a jazz musician and have a family?" And this was a heavy conversation. And then I reminded her of all the women musicians I know that do have families. And I'm like, you can have everything. You can have it all. It's all possible. And she was so relieved when after we talked about that. I says, it's up
Beautiful.
to you. It's all in front of you, and you'll have to make some decisions. But I decided that I wasn't, I had somebody tell me early on, you're going to be a jazz musician, you can't have a family.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, who are you talking about here? And then I named about six or seven, and, and 6 or 7 people that I says, you know, and then there's a story I remember Rufus telling me, when you sit down at a table full of these great musicians, he was telling me many years ago, they're not just talking about music, they're talking about the baseball game, they're talking about their kids doing this. It's life, and this is all part of life, and that's what comes out in the music you know
Yeah.
so it's been really great, to be able to clear up some of those questions that some students have about the future of their careers.
A lot of the students here, they forget sometimes how good they are,
Yeah.
how much talent they have. And so that's why it's all the more valuable for them to work with somebody at your level that understands that and understands that of course you have to stay humble. You can't be walking around thumping your chest, but you also can't forget what you've got to offer
Mm.
the world.
Yeah.
And you're so great at bringing that out in a student, giving them that self confidence, but at the same time giving them the facts about what they need.
Yeah, I'm, I've kind of watched the careers of a lot of the students that have, come and gone through our halls there. And I'm, always thrilled to see how great everybody's doing. And they're all kind of found their road.
Mhm.
And it's a beautiful thing because, like I said, we have so much talent at that school, and the kids, they work hard. And yeah, you have to believe in yourself, of course. And I try to get that through to them too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the course is, I pretty much have it where I want it, but then it changes a little bit depending on who our students are
Yeah.
uh, taking that course at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Steve, this has been amazing, really great. I mean, we've known each other for a long time, but I don't think we've ever had a chance to do this.
Right? No, probably not.
So, this has been a fantastic chance for me to get to know you better, but it's a chance for our audience to get to know somebody who not only is connected at William Paterson, but has had such an amazing career. And in some cases, just bassists in general don't get the recognition I feel that they need to. And in your case, this is to feature you as a leader, to feature your tunes and this great band. It's everything I had hoped.
Well,
So
I certainly appreciate the chance to do that, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Thank,
Thanks. And this has been a wonderful experience. Thanks so much for doing this, Steve.
thank
And
you, Dave.
if everybody wants to, you know, go see this, you can go to William Paterson under cultural events and go find the Jazz Room website and go get a ticket and go see this. You can, and by the way, it's pay what you want.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes, it's pay what you want. The bottom price is 10.
Okay.
Or if you want to donate and pay more, you can do that. But I mean, $10 to hear this band, you can't even get across the George Washington Bridge into New York.
Yeah, that's
Into
true.
New York to see a jazz club for that money.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
so it's the deal of the century. So thanks again, and
Thank you.
hope everybody enjoys the concert. Thanks.
Yes, I hope they do.